I've never been the type to believe in ghost stories or conspiracy theories. Honestly, I always thought that stuff was for people with wild imaginations or way too much free time. But what happened to me last Christmas made me question all of that. And, to be real with you, it still gives me the chills just thinking about it. It was the night of December 24th, and I was heading home after a family dinner. I live in a small town, the kind where everybody knows everybody. The road to my house goes past this old abandoned warehouse, a place that's always been the center of town gossip, mostly because of the story of Emily Thompson. Supposedly, she went missing when I was a kid during a school field trip, and they never found a trace of her. It was a cold night, but no snow, just that biting wind that cuts right through you. As I walked past the warehouse, I felt something I can't really explain. The air got heavy, almost suffocating. Everything around me went eerily silent, like even the usual city noises had just vanished. I wanted to hurry up and get home, but something made me stop. I looked up at the building and saw a broken window on the second floor. Nothing unusual there. The place was falling apart. But what froze me in place was the reflection. I swear I saw a girl standing there, wearing a white dress, her hair loose, staring straight at me. The moment I saw her, my whole body locked up. It was like my feet were glued to the ground. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination, maybe a reflection from a tree or something hanging inside the building. But something felt off. The girl wasn't moving, and her eyes, they looked empty, like they were staring right through me, like she knew me. After a few seconds, the figure just disappeared. She didn't run away, didn't go downstairs, she just vanished, as if she was never there. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but at the same time, something made me feel like I needed to take a closer look. Looking back now, it was a dumb move, but I walked closer to the warehouse. The doors were locked, like they always were, but I could feel a cold draft coming from inside, like someone had left a window open. I tried peeking through the cracks, but it was too dark to see anything. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this muffled sound. It was quiet, but it sounded like someone crying inside. My heart started racing. It didn't make sense. That place had been abandoned for decades. Who could possibly be in there? But the sound didn't stop, and whether it was curiosity or fear, I found myself walking around to the back to figure out what was going on. When I got to the back of the warehouse, I found an old, rusty metal door that looked like it had been forced open a long time ago. It was slightly ajar, with rust eating away at the hinges like it hadn't been touched in years. The crying had stopped, but now there was this strange sound, like something scratching against the concrete inside. It was soft, uneven, but just enough to make my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and with my hand shaking, aimed it at the entrance. All I could see was dust, fallen beams, and stacks of old boxes piled up haphazardly. I took one step inside, and the floor creaked under my weight. The air in there had this metallic, almost nauseating smell, and it was freezing, way colder than it was outside. As I kept exploring, I realized the scratching noise was coming from a far corner of the room. When I shined my light in that direction, my heart nearly stopped. On the floor, there were fresh marks, like something had recently been dragged through the dust. Deep grooves led to an open hole in the concrete. I couldn't understand how no one had noticed it before. The hole was narrow but deep, deep enough that I couldn't see the bottom. That's when I noticed something shiny inside. It looked like a silver chain. I knew I should have left and called someone, but instead, I knelt down to get a better look. As I reached out to shine my light into the hole, a cold gust of air rose from it, followed by a whisper that seemed to come from every direction at once. In that moment, every instinct I had was screaming for me to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. The whisper was faint, almost impossible to make out, but it felt like it was saying something, like a distant voice trying to communicate. My heart was racing, and my hands were slick with sweat. I stayed there, kneeling, for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of it until the sound shifted. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a muffled scream, desperate and coming from deep within the hole. I let out a scream of my own and stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The light went out as it hit the floor, and for a few seconds, everything was pitch black. The only sounds were my ragged breathing and that horrible noise coming from the hole. Scrambling in the dark, I grabbed my phone and switched the flashlight back on. When I pointed it at the hole again, what I saw made me want to run and never look back. A small, pale hand, covered in scratches, slowly reached out from the hole. It looked fragile, almost childlike, but at the same time, wrong. It wasn't just how it looked, it was the feeling it gave off, like it didn't belong in this world. And then I felt it. Something was behind me. It wasn't a sound or a touch, it was just a presence, like someone was watching me. I turned my head slowly, and the beam of my flashlight landed on her. The same girl I'd seen in the window. She was standing just a few feet away, her empty eyes locked onto mine. But this time, there was something different. She was smiling. I don't know how I managed to get to my feet, but somehow I did. My legs finally responded, and I ran. I didn't look back, didn't think, just ran as fast as I could until I was out of that place. The whole time, it felt like something was right behind me. I could almost hear footsteps chasing me, even though everything was silent. When I finally made it to the main road, I stopped to catch my breath and looked back. Nothing. The warehouse stood there, dark and lifeless, just like it always had. But I knew better. Something inside it wasn't normal. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think, but one image wouldn't leave my mind. Her smile. The way she looked. Satisfied that I'd been there. The next day, a mix of fear and curiosity consumed me. I started searching online for everything I could find about Emily Thompson, her disappearance, and the warehouse. That's when I came across something that made my stomach drop. When they found her remains years ago, it was noted that she had been wearing a silver chain. The same one I'd seen in the hole that night. I don't know how, but I felt like she wanted me to see it. Maybe it was a warning, maybe it was a cry for help, but either way, I've never gone near that place again. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but one thing's for sure. Something very wrong is buried in that warehouse, and I'll never forget what I felt that night. Since that night, I've avoided any conversation about the warehouse or Emily. Even so, I can't shake the images from my mind. The hole, the chain, that hand reaching out of it, and, of course, her face. That smile haunts me. It was like she knew something I didn't, like she was inviting me to uncover a secret that was better left buried. A few days later, the warehouse was suddenly surrounded by police and investigation teams. They claimed it was just a routine inspection, but no one ever explained why they were really there or what they were looking for. All I know is, after that, the place felt even more sinister. People in town started talking about strange noises coming from the warehouse at night. Footsteps, screams, even faint crying, just like I'd heard that night. Some say it's Emily's spirit, trapped there, trying to tell the truth about what really happened to her. Others think it's just the imagination of people who spook easily. I don't know what to believe, but I know what I saw. And it didn't feel like anything from this world. Even now, I avoid that place completely. I always take the longer route, but I still feel like the warehouse is watching me from afar, waiting for me to come back. It's hard to explain, but it feels like that night was just the beginning, and the sense that something was left unfinished has never gone away.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.
I never thought I'd be the kind of person with a story that sounds straight out of a movie. But unfortunately, what happened that Christmas Eve changed my life forever. I was a single mom, raising my 8-year-old daughter, Emily, and struggling to keep the bills paid. Our little apartment was in a modest neighborhood, but it was home. That Christmas, we didn't have much. I decorated a dry branch I found on the street and strung it up with discount store lights. Emily was so excited. She didn't even seem to notice that dinner was just pasta with sauce. It was late, almost midnight, and I had just put her to bed when I heard a strange noise coming from the living room window. At first I thought it might be a neighbor or maybe just the wind, but then I heard it again. Glass creaking, like someone was trying to force it open. My heart started pounding. I don't know how to explain it, but I got this terrible feeling, like something really bad was about to happen. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the call wouldn't go through. For a few seconds I just froze, trying to figure out what to do. And then I heard heavy footsteps outside, near the back door. It wasn't the wind, and it definitely wasn't my imagination. I knew I wasn't alone in the house. Before I could even react, there was a loud crack at the back door, like someone was trying to kick it in. I grabbed Emily, still fast asleep, and locked us in the bathroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I knew there was no way out through the front door without running straight into whoever was breaking in. Sitting on the bathroom floor, holding my daughter tight, I started whispering a prayer, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then, I smelled something weird, like something burning, and that's when panic really set in. Smoke started seeping under the bathroom door. I realized this wasn't some random break-in. Whoever was in the house had set it on fire. The thought of dying like that, unable to protect my daughter, was unbearable. I ran out of the bathroom and headed for the bedroom, where there was a window that opened to the backyard. I struggled to get the window open, and with Emily still in my arms, I pushed her. I pushed her out first without thinking twice. She was still asleep. I was trying to climb out myself when I heard a loud explosion. I don't know how I didn't pass out, but I remember the searing heat on my face and the smell of burning all around me. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion, but also too fast to process. When I finally made it out, I fell onto the backyard grass. My legs wouldn't work. Emily was awake by then, crying and terrified, but I couldn't even comfort her. All I could do was stare at the house, completely engulfed in flames. The heat was suffocating, and the fire lit up the night sky like it was swallowing everything. That's when I heard voices, not the police, but people inside the house. Footsteps, faint, muffled laughter. Whoever did this was still there. The helplessness I felt was overwhelming. I wanted to fight, to save what little we had, but my body was in shock. Then, I heard sirens in the distance. For the first time that night, I felt a shred of hope. The voices disappeared, and I heard footsteps running through the neighboring yard. They were gone before I could see who they were. When the firefighters arrived, I tried to shout for help, but my throat was so raw from the smoke that only whispers came out. One of the neighbors must have called 911, but to this day, nobody knows how the fire started so quickly or burned so fiercely. As the firefighters worked to put out the flames, I was taken to the ambulance with Emily in my arms. The smoke had irritated my eyes, and my skin was covered in mild burns, but the worst damage was inside me. I was completely shattered. Emily couldn't stop crying, and all I could do was hold her tightly and whisper that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. One of the paramedics asked if I had any idea who could have done this. When I tried to answer, my mind just froze. I had no clue who those people were or why they targeted my home. But deep down, I knew it wasn't random. There was something in the paramedic's eyes that told me he thought the same. The days that followed were a blur. The police came to the hospital to question me, and that's when I learned the fire seemed to be connected to a string of recent cases in the area. Several small homes, belonging to people who clearly didn't have much, had been targeted by fires after attempted break-ins. Apparently, my house was the first where there was evidence that the perpetrators were still inside when the fire started. That detail made everything scarier. These people weren't just looking to steal. It felt more cruel, more calculated. Even with that information, no arrests were made. The clues were always vague. Reports of hooded figures, indistinct footprints in the yard. It was like these people knew exactly how to disappear without a trace. After I was discharged from the hospital, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the house, or what was left of it. Just the thought of being near that place made my body freeze. Everything I owned was gone in the fire. Photos, clothes, even the few keepsakes of Emily's that I had treasured so much. We spent the next few months in a shelter while I tried to piece our lives back together. but the trauma followed me everywhere. At night, any small noise would jolt me out of bed. Sometimes I'd wake up smelling smoke, even though there was nothing burning. Emily had changed too. She wouldn't sleep alone anymore, and constantly asked if the bad people were coming back. I didn't know what to tell her. As time passed, the investigation seemed to hit a dead end. It wasn't until years later, after we had moved to another state, that I heard anything more about it. A friend sent me an article about new evidence connecting the fires to a local gang involved in drug trafficking and other crimes. The article said that while no arrests had been made yet, the police had identified a few suspects. Reading that stirred up a lot of emotions. Part of me wanted justice, but another part was terrified that digging into this could put Emily and me at risk again. To this day, I don't know why we were targeted that night. We didn't have anything of value, nothing that could justify such violence. The strangest part of it all is that, even after all these years, certain memories from that night still haunt me, especially the sound of laughter I heard inside the house as the fire spread. It wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It felt like they wanted to cause as much destruction as possible, like they were enjoying it. That thought left me paranoid. For a long time, I kept looking over my shoulder, suspicious of every unfamiliar face on the street, wondering if those people were still watching me. I've never been able to shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. It might sound like an overreaction, but after going through something like that, you can't trust the world the way you used to. Even now, when I think about that night, I can't help but wonder how we made it out alive. When I looked back from the ambulance and saw the flames completely engulfing the house, it seemed impossible that anyone could have escaped. I was lucky, but deep down, I can't shake the feeling that something or someone helped us. I'm not religious, but I've heard people say that on Christmas, unexplainable things can happen. For me, though, it wasn't a joyful or magical miracle. It was dark, chaotic, like something bigger was at play that night. The police might never catch the people responsible, and I might never understand why it happened. But one thing I know for sure is that since that night, the idea of being safe anywhere just doesn't exist for me anymore. After that night, my life turned into a constant state of vigilance. No matter how far I moved from that neighborhood or that day, the fear followed me. Simple things, like the snap of a branch or the smell of smoke from a barbecue, would freeze me in my tracks. That article about the gang gave me some answers, but it also left me with more questions. Why my house? Were they looking for something specific and just didn't find it? Or was it pure malice, completely senseless? Those questions are a constant weight, something I carry and probably never will resolve. What scares me the most, though, is the thought that those people are still out there. People who can do something so terrible, without remorse, without even considering what they almost took from me and my daughter. Every Christmas, I try to focus on the fact that we survived, that Emily and I are still together, but it's impossible not to remember the fire, the laughter coming from the shadows. Life has moved on, but a part of me is still trapped in that night, in the smell of smoke and those flames that destroyed everything. I just want to understand why. Maybe I never will.
Please subscribe our YouTube
It was
channel.
supposed to be a peaceful Christmas, just like it always had been with my family. The year had been rough, but we were determined to make the most of the night together, surrounded by twinkling lights and the smell of turkey roasting in the oven. Mom was in the kitchen, Dad was arranging presents under the tree, and I was helping my little sister hang the last ornaments that kept slipping off the branches. It was the typical holiday scene, everyone laughing and trying to forget about their problems. But looking back, there was a strange tension in the air, like the universe was trying to warn us that something awful was about to happen. It all started around 8 p.m., when we heard a knock at the door. Not the doorbell, but loud, heavy knocks that broke the comfortable silence in the living room. Mom, her apron dusted with flour, went to answer, thinking it was a neighbor or a relative who was running late. But the moment she opened the door, I could tell from the sound of her voice that something wasn't right. I couldn't make out what the person was saying, but the way Mom hesitated to respond and how her whole demeanor shifted sent a chill down my spine. She's always been the type to handle things calmly, but in that moment, she seemed scared. When I walked closer to the door, I saw a man I didn't recognize right away, but his expression was unsettling. He was tense, his face red like he'd been running or fuming. Mom was trying to stay composed, but it was obvious she was frightened. A few seconds later, Dad came to the hallway, stepping in to handle the situation. That's when he recognized the man, a former employee from the company where Dad worked as a manager. Dad had mentioned him a couple of times in the past, someone who'd been fired for bad behavior. From the way he looked at us, it was clear he wasn't there to talk things out peacefully. Dad tried to keep it polite, saying this wasn't the right time and suggesting they meet another day to discuss whatever was going on, but the man wasn't having it. He started shouting, accusing Dad of ruining his life, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong recently. It all escalated so fast, none of us had time to react. He shoved the door open and barged into the house. It was like the world flipped upside down in an instant. Mom screamed, my sister started crying, and I froze for a moment, trying to process what was happening. He was holding something in his hand. It looked like a piece of metal or a tool, and the way he moved was wild and erratic, like he was ready to explode. As soon as he got inside, he started yelling and smashing things. He broke a chair with one swing and knocked decorations off the shelves, sending shards flying everywhere. It was like he wanted to destroy everything in sight. Dad tried to intervene, but the guy was way stronger and completely out of control. When he raised his arm holding that piece of metal, Dad backed off, and that's when it hit me. None of us could stop him. He wasn't just angry, he was there to make us feel the pain he thought we deserved. Mom's screams echoed through the room, and all I could think about was protecting my sister, who was trembling under the dining table. At that moment, I realized our phone was on the couch across the room. It was our only chance to call for help, but getting to it felt impossible. The man paced back and forth, kicking furniture and threatening my dad with that piece of metal while ranting about how unfair the world was. He seemed so consumed by his own anger that he didn't even notice how terrified we were. My mom tried pleading with him, saying it was Christmas, that it didn't have to be this way, but he ignored her completely. It was like the holiday itself was an insult to him. I knew if no one did something, things could end up much worse. While he was wrecking the living room, I seized a moment when his back was turned to sneak over to the couch and grab the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I managed to dial 911 and whisper a few words before hanging up to avoid drawing attention. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. He was still yelling at my dad, waving that piece of metal around like he was about to strike. Then my mom, in a desperate move, ran into the kitchen and came back with a pot in her hand. I don't think she meant to hit him, more like she was trying to create a distraction. She started yelling telling him to leave, and for the first time he seemed to hesitate. That hesitation was just enough time for the sound of police sirens to echo in the distance. When he heard them, he froze for a second, and you could see on his face that he knew his time was running out. He looked at all of us, and the expression on his face sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just anger, it was this twisted satisfaction, like he was pleased with himself for making us so scared. Without another word, he gave the couch one last kick and bolted out the open door. We stood there for a few seconds, frozen in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. It wasn't until the police officers came in a few minutes later that we started to feel even a little bit safe. Even with the police there, the fear didn't go away. My dad tried to explain what had happened, but you could tell he was just as shaken as the rest of us. The living room looked like a war zone, broken glass everywhere, furniture in pieces, the Christmas tree knocked over with ornaments scattered across the floor. My sister was still crying, and my mom held her so tightly it seemed like she'd never let go. I couldn't stop replaying the man's expression in my mind before he left. It was like he knew he'd left a scar, something that would last far longer than the physical damage to our home. After the police left, promising to try and track him down, we just sat there in silence. No one had the energy to clean up or even think about celebrating again. The sound of the sirens still echoed in my head, and every shadow or noise outside felt like it could be him coming back. I didn't sleep that night, and honestly, I don't think anyone else did either. What haunts me the most to this day isn't just what happened, it's how easy it was for him to walk into our home, turn our world upside down, and leave as if nothing had happened. Since that night, Christmas has never felt the same.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.